Why did those talks in Berlin between Russia and Ukrainian negotiators fail? Is war inevitable? With us now, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East and ABC defense analyst, Mick Mulroy. Mick, thank you so much for being with us and sharing your expertise. I want to start with these sticking points in negotiations. What is the biggest problem? Does Russia honestly want to engage?
Well, Deidre, I think that's the actual question. Whether these talks are simply to allow Russia to get into the military position to be able to do a full-scale invasion. And it looks like that is where they're heading. As Terry mentioned in his report, they have troops in Belarus. They have troops on the direct border. And now they are flooding the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov with a naval armada that's both capable of blockading the ports and capable of putting a substantial assault force, their naval infantry, what we call our Marine Corps, into another front. So essentially enveloping the Ukraine with military capacity. So I do not know if diplomacy has a chance to diffuse the situation. I think we should all be hoping that's the case. But it looks now that Russia is intending to do an invasion. Whether it's a full-scale or a limited, we do not know. But the buildup certainly indicates that that is likely.
So in the past few weeks, Ukrainian leaders have really been downplaying this buildup, almost saying that the U.S. has been stoking more tension than helping. What do you make of that point of view?
Well, I think that may have been some wishful thinking. They didn't want to create a scenario where people were flooding out of the Ukraine, potentially damaging their economy. But now I think it's very clear that they understand the dire circumstances they are in. They have instigated, under the Vienna documents, a request that Russia explain their military activities, and Russia, under those agreements, has 48 hours. I think it's very clear that the Ukraine understands that this is likely to happen, and that now they are full in preparation for how to oppose an invasion. And in my estimation, they are looking how will they oppose any occupation, which would be a massive insurgency, which could last for years, if not decades.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we saw activity in 2014, which many in that country are still living with. What do we know about the call this morning among Western leaders? What can the global community do at this point?
So I think the first thing they can do is be on the same sheet of music and saying all the same things, which is swift and severe sanctions immediately, whether it's a limited invasion or a full-fledged invasion. The consequences to Russia economically should be dire, and that is something that President Putin will have to calculate into his decision whether to go or not. That is the number one thing. After that, we need to decide collectively, NATO, how we're going to position ourselves to ensure that this conflict does not spread into NATO countries. I agree with President Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, that this will not stay contained in Ukraine. We're looking at potentially 5 million people leaving the Ukraine and going into countries like Poland. And then we're looking for, in any successful insurgency, they have to have a safe haven, which means they're going to go into countries neighboring the Ukraine, which will likely be NATO countries. So this has a significant chance to escalate and spread. That is what the NATO countries need to be talking about. What are they going to do to protect themselves? And then, of course, what are they going to do to support the Ukraine even after an invasion?
So, Mick, you've been in conversations when big decisions were being made in the past. So it seems like from what you're saying that people are talking about best case scenario, how do we respond? Worst case scenario, how do we respond? With the sanctions, even if Putin personally has sanctions placed upon him, there are some people who say he doesn't really care and he's prepared for this. Do you think that's true?
I think it could be true. I mean, the psychology of President Putin's been talked a lot about lately for good reason. He considers the breakup of the Soviet Union as one of the biggest catastrophes in history. He is looking to try to regain that, obviously by terrain in this case. He might not be that concerned about economic sanctions. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, and doesn't mean they shouldn't be severe, because it has to be at least part of his calculation. Whether it will be enough to to prevent him from doing this is yet to be determined, but his actions indicate, quite frankly, that they are not, because he is positioning his forces to be able to seize key, I would say, metropolitan centers in the Ukraine. And if that's the case, he is looking for a long-term occupation of that country. He, I'm sure, has understood that the consequences could be dire, not just economically, but also militarily. There's going to be a lot of, quite frankly, dead Russian soldiers that come out of this. But this is something he's going to take into his calculation. We hope that he decides not to do it. But all indications are that he is.
Mick, on one of the other points that you just mentioned as well, and I just want to make sure I heard you correctly, you're saying if there is an aggression, no matter what the size, that the rest of the neighboring countries are basically going to be facing a refugee crisis. Did I hear you correctly?
Yeah, Deidre, you did hear me correctly, and I think that is exactly what the intelligence estimate that came out last week is. They're looking at potentially 50,000 civilians being killed during the initial invasion. They're looking at 5 million displaced people going to countries like Poland, which already has a large Ukrainian ethnic group. So that's likely where they will go. This is going to spread up beyond Poland. And if you look at it from the perspective of Russia, once you invade and occupy and you have this raging insurgency, you will likely try to hit their safe haven, just like we did when we were in Afghanistan. Pakistan, particularly the tribal areas, was a safe haven for the Taliban. We had to figure out a way to deal with that. Russia will have to figure out a way to deal with the safe haven of the Ukrainian insurgency, and that safe haven is going to be a NATO country. So this is going to have a potential to rapidly take two world powers and put them in direct conflict. And so this is not something that we should just see as a Ukrainian problem, which is bad enough. This is a Europe problem. This is a NATO versus Russia problem.
Well, Mick, I am keeping my fingers crossed, as I'm sure you are, for the best case scenario. Thank you so much in the meantime for sharing your perspective, Mick Mulroy, with us there.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.